We're less than a month away from Super Tuesday, and Monmouth University is out with a new poll showing a three-way statistical tie in the state of Virginia. Michael Bloomberg, Senator Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden are all statistically tied for first. Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar are statistically tied for fourth with 11% and 9% respectively, while Senator Elizabeth Warren comes in sixth with 5%. Joining us now with more on that new polling, and the director of Monmouth University Polling Institute, Patrick Murray. Great to have you on.
Hey, Patrick, obviously, screaming headline here, Michael Bloomberg's advertisements appear by themselves to have propelled him to first place in Virginia. Tell us about the findings, what you learned.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to look ahead to Super Tuesday because that's where Mike Bloomberg is going to, start playing. And the case there is he's doing really well in Northern Virginia in particular, but he's doing well across the board. And I think those advertisements have really bought him some play there, while Joe Biden's numbers have dropped across the country. And we've seen that because of what happened in Iowa and New Hampshire. I mean, so right now, Bernie Sanders has a national lead. But when we start looking at these Super Tuesday states, there's a possibility for Mike Bloomberg to make a play. A lot will depend on what happens in Nevada and South Carolina. We'll see how these numbers change because right now we only have 1 in 4 Virginia Democratic primary voters who say that they're definitely set on their choice.
Let me go to Guy Cecil, ask him a quick question, then I know he'll have a question for you. Guy, I'm sure you, like me, like a lot of people, have been wondering over the past month whether all of the money, all the 30-second ads by Mike Bloomberg could propel him past 15% in some of these Super Tuesday states. What's your reaction to this Virginia poll that shows that it actually has put him in first place along with Bernie Sanders?
I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. I think as more polling comes out in the South and really across Super Tuesday states, you're going to see similar results for two reasons. Number one, voters in Super Tuesday states are not the same as Iowa and New Hampshire, and it's not just about demography. They aren't as tied in or paying as much attention to these races as caucus goers and frequent primary voters in the first two states that have this tradition of participation. These are folks that are living their lives. They're not fully engaged in the primary process. They're not super volunteers or caucus precinct leaders. And so television is going to have an outsized effect. I think the real question will come when these two campaigns engage on the airwaves. We're starting to see that on Twitter, and I think that's just the canary in the coal mine for what we're going to see in the debate and what we're going to see online going forward. And the question I have is whether or not this flexibility in the race is something we're going to continue to see. My guess would be that there's a lot of flexibility in this race, not just because of the money being spent, but also because people aren't really clued in and paying that much attention to these primaries yet.
Patrick, how much flexibility?
There's a lot right now. I think, as I said, only 25% in Virginia are firmly decided. They're waiting to see what happens in those first two states. Mike Bloomberg is going to be on the debate stage this week. That will have an effect. And right now, we ran some head-to-heads against Bernie Sanders against these other candidates. Bloomberg and Biden beat Sanders, but Buttigieg and Klobuchar, they're basically a tie. They lose by a couple of points to Sanders. Those candidates have not been able to introduce themselves to Virginia voters or anywhere on Super Tuesday yet, whereas Bloomberg has basically owned the field there. And so that's going to change once those voters, as Guy said, start tuning in to this because they haven't been paying as much attention as the early voter states.
Gene, the internals of this poll, or the Monmouth poll, as Patrick just outlined, some of the responses to questions are really interesting. Have firmly decided, are you on your 2020 choice? 62% are open to a different candidate. But for Bernie Sanders, there's a real heads up in one of the questions when posed, I would rather have a candidate who unites the country or brings about change. 67% would prefer a candidate who unites the country, opposed to 27% who brings about change.
Yeah, and that would be bad news for Bernie Sanders because he's not that kind of uniter. He's got his ideology, he's got his ideas, and there are a lot of people who support him, but he's not exactly reaching out across the aisle. This is just going to be fascinating. It really is. Those numbers in Virginia surprised me. It surprised me that Elizabeth Warren is way down at 4%. She had been anecdotally quite popular in Virginia. It just shows the impact that Bloomberg's ads are having. This is on. This is really on. It's going to be fascinating tomorrow night.
We got a game. Patrick Murray, thank you very much. And Guy Cecil, thank you as well. And Gene Robinson will be reading your new piece in the Washington Post today entitled, Democratic Candidates Are Doing Trump's Job for Him.
Could you explain that for us a little bit, Gene? How are Democratic candidates doing Trump's job for him?
Well, they're doing the oppo and the negative attacks. It's not all on television now, but there's a lot of increasingly bitter, not just sniping, but attacks among the candidates. And I urge them to keep their eye on the ball. Somebody's going to emerge with this nomination, and the party, if it's going to win, is going to have to unite behind that somebody. And so tearing each other to shreds at this point. You have to compete, but tearing each other to shreds at this point does not seem to me to be a constructive thing.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.